While there's no such thing as a perfect table saw, Festool's portable table saw gets pretty darn close. And this is my entire journey with it, from Festool contacting me about it, to the creative, to actually using it, and of course my overall thoughts and opinions about the pros and cons of this table saw, as well as who and what it's meant for. So yes, as full disclosure and transparency, Festool did send me this table saw to not only keep, they did also pay me to create 2 short form videos for them, both of which I'll be talking about in this video. This video is completely on my own though, and they have no say on the thoughts and opinions that I'll be sharing with you. When Festool contacted me about potentially creating a video for them, I was over the moon. It wasn't a sponsorship, but a collaboration for one tool, which I was more than happy to do. Because plain and simply, Festool does make undeniable good stuff. The terms were actually quite simple. 1, they wanted me to post on specific dates and times. 2, for the first video, they wanted it to be a teaser and wanted me not to reveal it. And 3, for the second video, they wanted me to showcase its portability and capability in a short video, with the creative freedom being completely up to me. With the first video, the saw actually did not arrive on time, and after some discussion, they asked me to do my best to make a video without it. My reaction to that was, how are we supposed to do that? And my partner's reaction to that was, give me a few minutes to think. So instead of making a teaser trailer with an actual sustainer container, he was the one who came up with the idea of using this little guy, which I think worked pretty well. For the second video, we obviously needed to get a little more creative to showcase its portability. And initially, we had a few different ideas on the table. Make something on the beach, the forest, on top of a building, or even on a boat. We looked into a lot of laws for all of that information, and essentially it started to get really complicated on where we could or could not go without reaching someone to get proper permission first, which we were also running out of time for. Additionally, since we still feel kind of new to Houston, we don't exactly know where all the scenic spots are yet. Eventually, we reached out to our friends at Mobility Lift Aids, and they came to our rescue very quickly. Suggestion number 1 was by a lake, and suggestion number 2 was by a mountain biking trail that followed along a creek. When we went to check out the first location, we almost went ahead and settled on it because of how serene it looked. But when we took the extra 15-minute trip to check out the trail, we walked until we found the creek and instantaneously fell in love with the spot. There were some turtles swimming around, it had really good shade, and we both were kind of like, yeah, this is the spot. So huge thank you to Kenny and Jonathan for helping us out with that. While all the location scouting was happening, I was also trying to figure out what I wanted to build. I wanted to work on a project that wasn't too small so that I could show what it was capable of. But I also didn't want to work on one that was too big or complicated either, because the more complicated the design, the more portable tools I would have needed to get the job done, which is something I don't have a lot of. While thinking of projects, one thing I knew I wanted to do was use a variety of cuts. Because as much as I wanted to showcase its portability, for my own curiosity, I also wanted to see what it could handle. And after going through a bunch of different ideas like birdhouses, a pour-over coffee stand, and boxes with lids, I eventually landed on the idea of making a Viking chair, also known as the world's simplest chair, and a collapsible side table. Because I am not a Viking, I'm sure you might have figured out that they were my own personal designs. If you did think I was a Viking, well, I'll take that as a compliment. I actually found these projects from Pinterest when I was searching for collapsible furniture, and when I looked through the pictures of the Viking chair and side table, I saw that the combination of these 2 items would require rip cuts, cross cuts, and dado cuts too. I knew dado cuts weren't going to be easy with their thin curved blade, but I figured it was a good project to try out anyways to see how it performed. And overall, I just felt like there were going to be good projects to not only test the table saw out with, but to enjoy immediately after. The day before the shoot, I unpacked it from the box to take a look at what I was working with, and of course to charge the batteries. I remember its size really surprised me, and additionally, it all packed up and back down very nicely. I turned it on briefly to see how loud it would get, and while it wasn't whisper quiet, it was much quieter than I would have expected a table saw to be. How fast the blade would both turn on and come to a full stop were also incredible to see. On the day of the shoot, we loaded everything into the car and drove roughly 1 hour to get to our spot in the woods. It has been relentlessly hot in Houston lately, and that day was no different. 104 5 degrees with very few clouds in sight. Luckily though, the spot we chose had a lot of shade from the trees. Pulling the sustainer out there was a lot easier than I expected because of its dolly feature, but I did have to carry it over an odd steep area to get to our spot. And once we got there, I set everything up and got to building. The chair itself is an incredibly simple design. So simple that if you literally Googled world's simplest chair, you will see this Viking chair in the results. The materials I used were a pair of 3/4 inch plywood, and essentially it's two boards linked together by cutting a square window or mortise in one and cutting a long tenon on the other board to slide through the other's window. The table was also very simple. For the legs, I used 2x4 pine and cut them into two different lengths. One length for the vertical pieces and another length for the horizontal pieces. Afterwards, I rip cut all the 2x4s in half, did half lap joints on the vertical and horizontal pieces, and then screwed them all together. And finally, to turn it into a table, all that was left was for me to slide a piece of plywood through the windows and the legs. And voila! For this being the very first time I used a table saw, I really did find it to be amazing. Everything felt intuitive and worked quickly. There were a couple of points where things got a little sketchy, but that was 100% because of me and not the saw. For example, I knew I needed a handsaw that was small enough to fit in an inch hole, and none of my saws were small enough to get the job done. Right before leaving, all I could find in my garage was this big rough tooth drywall saw, and since my partner was already waiting for me in the car, I decided to just grab it and figure it out later. When I actually started using it, I very quickly regretted doing that. I kept saying, oh, man, I should have brought my Japanese saws. The specific part I used them on was for these two notches on one of the chair pieces. I'd say 50% of the material was already removed, and all I had to do was push the saw back and forth a couple times. But man, that process was rough, and even though no one was around, it still felt embarrassing to do. Because one of the pieces needed a 1 inch by 9 inch squared window, I was not wanting to fight the board with the drywall saw. So I decided to try out another move to get the cut done, and that was boring as much as I could with a 1 inch Forstner bit and straightening the edges by raising the blade while it was running. And it worked! I was curious if that would work or not, and it did. Once I'd finished them, I first just sat back on the chair and put my drink on the table. But after working those 3 hours in the heat, I very quickly switched things up and used the table as a leg rest instead. The batteries did also end up getting low. By oversight, I completely forgot to think about the battery life, so they did get into the red by the time I'd finished the project. Thankfully though, they didn't run out. And after relaxing for a bit, we went ahead and packed everything up, brought everything back to the car, and the rest is history. So now let's go over all the pros and cons that I have personally noticed with the saw. The pros. Number one, the sliding table feature. This is probably the coolest feature about it. Any sliding feature I have ever seen on any kind of saw has always made things really beefy and take up a large footprint in the shop. The fact that they were able to include it in such a compact and smooth form is honestly mind-blowing. Having this feature massively extends the crosscut capacity from 6 inches to 16 inches. And additionally, you can actually clamp down your piece to the sliding table, so there will be very minimal shifting. Number two, the in-unit digital display and adjustments. Both the blade height and angle can be adjusted in-unit. That means goodbye to manual calibration with separate devices, and because it's in-unit, you'll know that you're getting an accurate cut to itself every single time. The height and angle of the blade can both be adjusted in increments as small as 1/64 of an inch and 0.1 degrees respectively. If you're wanting to use metric instead of imperial, or even just want to be in a different language, you can easily change it all in the system. Number three, there's an indicator for blade alignment on the tabletop. While I was making crosscuts, I noticed engraved lines on the surface of the tabletop. I realized that those lines were aligned to the blade. So if you decided to make a mark on the edge of the board and lined it up to the engraving, you will get your cut exactly where you marked. Normally, I would bring the board up to the blade to get it aligned, but with this, I didn't have to. Number four, its compact size and enclosure. For any portable saw, being compact is one thing, but you never see them enclosed. Being in a sustainer can not only help with moving it around, but it also helps with storing it away. No nooks and crannies for a spider to build a home, and it won't be exposed to weather change. And because it's in a sustainer, you can also store something else on top of it. Number 5, the dust extraction is amazing. I was honestly really impressed with this dust bag. I look at the dust bags that come along with tools as useless because I haven't found them to work well. But this one was different. Unless I was shaving the wood, there was very little sawdust flying around from cuts. It was incredible to see that this level of dust extraction was possible with such a little bag attached to it. Number 6, the interchangeability within the Festool ecosystem. The saw blade can actually be taken out to be used on their track saw and vice versa. Additionally, the batteries from any of their cordless lineup can be used interchangeably with each other, making any expansion that you have within the Festool system that much stronger. As for the cons, number 1, this table saw does have a limit on the scale of work that you want to do. I mean, I would never look at this and think, you know what, let me make a conference table with it. This is a job site table saw, and to be fair, they've never claimed it to be more. It's best for small to mid-scale projects or something that requires precision. If you are truly looking for something for larger scale projects, you'd need to be looking at contractor saws, cabinet saws, or even an industrial one depending on what you're trying to do. Number 2, I would definitely invest in a second set of batteries. After using the saw intensively for about 2.5 hours, the battery did almost meet its end. So if you don't have a second set of batteries, you'll have to take about an hour break for the batteries to fully recharge, which, all things considered, is still pretty fast. Number 3, everything needs to be put back precisely in order to properly close it. I am very neat, and even so, the first couple times I tried to close the stainer, it did not work. I had to open it back up several times to shift things just a bit to make sure everything was in the correct spot. I'm sure being tired and in the 100-degree weather also had an effect on my patience, but if you're not a very patient person, this could potentially work against you. For the sustainer system to be as small as it is, they designed everything to fit precisely with very little extra room, so don't expect to be able to rush your packing with this table saw. Number 4, their built-in push stick style is not my cup of tea. I don't know if it's a personal thing, but I never liked using the small footprint style push stick on the table saw. It's tiny, small, and feels unstable to use. My personal preference for push sticks are ones with a larger and longer surface portion so that I can apply a lot of downward forces, kind of like this one. Number 5, it's not cheap. I'm not gonna lie, this saw ain't no bag of chips, but it isn't baseless either. Every maker needs to measure out the values that make sense to them and make their purchase decisions based on that. In the end, the Festool CSC SYS 50 is a wonderful job site table saw that is super packed with features. And while it might seem overkill in some ways, they're all things that are nice to have and make for a smoother, faster, and more enjoyable process. Festool is known to be the brand that unapologetically packs great features and really good tech into their devices. And because of that, they also charge a lot for it. In my opinion, I think that's totally fine. Because the thing is, you absolutely can accomplish the same thing with other options. You don't need to have a Festool to be able to make great things. Know yourself and be aware of both your needs and your budget. Because the craft isn't in the tool, it's in the hands wielding it. Hello and welcome to today's post-show hangout session. Thank you for watching this episode and staying tuned until the end. Doing this collaboration was honestly a super awesome experience, especially because I do like and respect Festool for what they do and who they are as a brand. Additionally, this was my first big collaboration with a brand, and while I will be focusing more on my channel and what I build, I will always be happy to get involved with brands and people that I trust and respect. So to that, I also do want to give a thank you to Festool for selecting me as a candidate for that promotion. One thing that I have been working on is a transition away from custom projects, at least for a while. I have some really big plans for things to build, and because of that, I really want to start working on projects that speak to me. No budget, no limitations, just go with all my might. And because of that, it of course will severely impact my income, so I do want to say special thank you to all my Patreon members for having stuck with me so far in this journey. As I start to transition towards more woodworking artistry and projects that I personally want to work on, your support is literally everything now. And if you too want to support my journey in this woodworking world, do consider Patreon as an option. Thank you all for watching and happy woodworking.